Okay, so how would the most recent election results have looked if Canada was using something like proportional representation? Well, it would look like this. Compared to the actual results using the first-past-the-post system, so there's our current results on the left, and under proportional representation, you see it on the right. So a big difference. The Liberals would have been way down. Under proportional representation, the Liberals and Conservatives actually would have been tied with 109 seats each. The NDP follow with 65 seats, 24 for the Bloc, 21 to the People's Party of Canada, and the Green Party, 11 instead of the 2 that they actually got. PPC would have ended up with 21, yeah. Well, Dave Meslin is the creative director of Unlock Democracy Canada and author of Tear Down, Rebuilding Democracy from the Ground Up. He's in Toronto. Hi, Dave.
Hey, good evening.
Okay, so I'm going to take a look at what Professor Philippe Fournier, under a proportional representation voting system, said. He, hypothetically, the Liberals and the Conservatives would have 109 seats each.
Yeah.
Okay, going back to that, we see all of these numbers: Bloc at 24, NDP 65, Green with 11, PPC at 21. What does this tell us about the potential faults of our first-past-the-post system?
Well, a lot. Any election systems should strive to give us the parliament that we asked for, right? Especially considering that, a lot of people didn't even bother to vote. The largest voting bloc in Canada was actually not the Liberals or the Conservatives. They each got around like 6 million votes. 11 million people didn't even bother to vote. That's a problem of itself. But the people who did take the time to vote, they went out of their way to either mail something in, line up at a polling station. Why wouldn't you want an election system that gave those voters what they asked for? And I know Justin Trudeau thinks that proportional representation is some weird, obscure system that would threaten Canada's stability. But, that's kind of like the big lie of Canada. The big lie in the U.S. is that Trump won the last election. And the big lie in Canada is that we use a normal modern voting system, and we don't. The most common voting system is some kind of proportional system. It's used by the most stable, successful, moderate countries in the world, and everyone knows that.
Okay, you're talking about with the Trump non-victory, something that's just demonstrably untrue, whereas Canada has made a choice, but also not made a choice to change to something like proportional representation.
What's demonstrably untrue is that the proportional system that Trudeau criticizes would give disproportionate power to fringe parties. It's just not the way it works.
Well, it would give power to those fringe parties in a way that they don't have political. So if I just use the PPC, for example, got 0 seats in this election, would have got 21 under proportional representation. Still not even 10% of the seats there, but it's some. And under a system under which the Liberals and the Conservatives, who often oppose one another, have exactly the same number of seats, you got to get support from elsewhere.
Absolutely. So first of all, let's back up a bit, because if we had a normal voting system like the systems used by almost every Western democracy in the world, we would have had more choices on Monday, right? The Liberals and Conservatives would split up into 2 or 3 parties each, as they should. Sorry, the Conservatives and the NDP would both split up into 2 or 3 parties each. We know that the conservative blue tent encompasses a lot of people who don't like each other, don't get along with each other, and have very different views of what conservatism is. The same with the NDP. You've got everyone from very moderate democratic socialists to people who self-identify as Marxists. And proportionality would actually give us a wider variety of choices. And whichever parties got together to form a coalition after the election, the last parties they would look to for support is the extreme right or the extreme left. Those parties, like the PPC, would be left out of every collaborative coalition government. Okay. No one's going to turn to the most radical, because then you lose support from your own grassroots. It's just not the way it works. And again, this isn't just me talking. You could look at countries like New Zealand, like Sweden, like Norway, like Germany. It's just the way it works.
Okay, but let me throw another country at you, Italy. which has enjoyed considerable stability in recent years, but that was after, we complain about having an election every 18 months, perhaps, but they were having them like, I'm joking here, but like every 48 hours a couple of decades ago, before Silvio Berlusconi came into power with an enormous amount of seats and therefore the ability to govern almost without a coalition of others. But Italy had a considerable level of shakiness.
So I wrote a book that came out 2 years ago about voting systems and voting reform. And I have an entire section called What About Israel and Italy? Because everyone always brings up Italy and Israel. It's an extreme case of cherry picking. So Italy and Israel would have a dysfunctional political landscape under any voting system just because of what's happening in those countries and their history. Those are arguably the most two invaded countries in the history of the world. If you want to look at data in a scientific way, what you'll find is that countries like New Zealand, like Germany, like Australia, like Sweden, Norway, Holland, you name it, they have fewer elections than Canada. Keep in mind, we just had an election 2 years ago, and we're going to have another one in the next year and a half or 2 years. There is nothing about our system that guarantees any form of stability. So if you remove the cherry-picked examples of Italy and Israel, what you find is that our system, the system used by the UK, the US, and Canada, actually is more likely to lead to extremism, like Trump, like Boris Johnson, more polarization, less choice, more women in politics, more distortion, more exaggerated regionalism. You and I both know that there's lots of liberals and New Democrats in Alberta and lots of conservatives in Toronto, and those folks don't have the representation they deserve, just like all the Greens and the People's Party voters all across Canada. Okay,
we're having this great discussion at a theoretical level, but there have been parties and activists and academics and people like you saying we should go to proportional representation since before rotary dial phones. And it hasn't happened because the Liberals and the Conservatives have benefited from the system under which we exist now, and therefore have no incentive to make any changes. It's the other parties. The NDP's been saying, please, a proportional representation. Been saying it for years. Nothing's happened.
Yeah, I mean, I don't even think the NDP has been genuinely fighting for it because they've been in power with majority governments in Manitoba, Alberta, BC, Ontario, Nova Scotia. They've never done it either. All the big parties, including the NDP, benefit from the current system in the long run because eventually they all get fake majorities. Less frequently for the NDP, fair enough, but they do happen, even in Alberta. So what we need is a bottom-up movement. What I advocate for is for all of us to start thinking about how voting reform could work at the municipal level. If you look at the history of any major reform, like when did women get the vote? Women secured the vote municipally in Canada 30 years before they got it federally. So if we want to get voting reform happening, it's not going to be at the federal level now because, well, your other hat you wear is with the Marketplace show. So you know all about cartels and price fixing and oligopolies. What we essentially have is 2 or 3 parties colluding to perpetuate a system that pushes out new voices. That's bad for innovation. It's bad for creativity. And we're the ones who lose at the end of the day as voters. But if we want change, forget about Ottawa, forget about Queen's Park and Victoria and Halifax. The place we should be looking at is city halls, not provincial, not federal. And if we start bringing in ranked ballots or semi-proportional systems to elect our city councillors and our mayors, you can bet that our premiers and prime minister will follow. Okay,
I've got 30 seconds left here, but let me throw not a municipal race at you, but a territorial system. Nunavut. Very consensus-based.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we'll ever get consensus-based government in Canada, but I'll mention that one of the strongest benefits of a proportional voting system is that it encourages collaborative decision-making within Parliament, the exact opposite of what we see now, which is 338 grown adults yelling at each other in between elections.
All right. Dave Meslin, something for us to think about. We'll see. We'll see if something like this ever happens. But as you say, maybe it has to happen at a lower level of government and work its way up into the federal system. Appreciate your thoughts on this.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.